According to regional defense monitoring reports and multiple international security sources, a new phase of escalation has emerged in the Middle East as Iran intensifies its coordinated missile and unmanned aerial vehicle operations against Israel's air defense network. In late March, defense observers recorded a sustained pattern of attacks in which between 80 to 100 missiles and UAVs were launched daily, forming layered strike waves designed not for immediate breakthrough but for continuous system saturation. Israeli air defense systems, including the multi-layered Iron Dome network valued at approximately $50 billion, along with Arrow and U.S.-supported interception systems, have been forced into near-constant activation under this pressure. Military analysts emphasize that this is not a traditional strike campaign, but a calculated attrition strategy where low-cost drones are deployed as decoys to trigger defensive responses, followed by more advanced missile systems exploiting emerging gaps. In this evolving battlefield dynamic, each interception carries not only tactical significance but also a growing logistical and financial burden, as high-cost interceptors are used repeatedly against mass incoming targets. At the center of global attention is the reported deployment of a new hypersonic-capable missile system by Iran, described as reaching speeds of up to Mach 12 and capable of maneuvering during its terminal phase. Such performance characteristics challenge the core logic of existing interception systems, which rely heavily on trajectory prediction and response timing, both of which are significantly reduced under hypersonic conditions. Defense officials note that when engagement windows shrink to just seconds, even minimal deviations in tracking calculations can result in interception failure, placing unprecedented strain on multi-layered defense structures. Simultaneously, reports suggest that some of these advanced strike systems have been directed toward strategically sensitive areas, including zones linked to critical infrastructure, increasing both military and symbolic pressure. Meanwhile, the operational tempo shows no signs of slowing, with more than 70 attack waves recorded and Iran maintaining a steady launch rhythm supported by ongoing production and reserve capacity. This sustained offensive pattern indicates that the objective is not a single decisive strike, but a prolonged campaign designed to stretch defensive systems to their operational limits over time. As the situation continues to unfold, the confrontation is increasingly defined not by individual attacks, but by a broader contest between sustained offensive pressure and the endurance of defensive systems. The central question now being raised across military and geopolitical circles is whether even the most advanced and heavily funded air defense systems can maintain effectiveness under continuous saturation and emerging hypersonic threats. Welcome to our channel, where we break down complex global conflicts through verified data, strategic analysis, and multi-layered geopolitical context. In this report, the ongoing confrontation between Iran and Israel is no longer viewed as a series of isolated strikes, but as a structured escalation that reflects deeper shifts in regional power dynamics and military doctrine. The Middle East has long been defined by cycles of tension, but what is unfolding now suggests a transition from short-term retaliation towards sustained strategic competition across multiple domains. At the center of this development is Iran's evolving approach to warfare, which appears to combine cost efficiency, operational persistence, and layered attack coordination to challenge technologically advanced defense systems. Rather than relying on a single decisive strike, the current pattern indicates a deliberate attempt to reshape the battlefield through continuous pressure, forcing defensive systems into prolonged high-intensity operation. This shift is particularly significant when examined in the context of Israel's long-standing investment in multi-layered air defense architecture designed to intercept threats ranging from short-range rockets to long-range ballistic missiles. Systems such as Iron Dome, Arrow, and David's Sling were developed to create overlapping layers of protection, each optimized for specific types of incoming threats. However, these systems were primarily designed to operate under conditions where attack volumes, trajectories, and timing remained within predictable thresholds. The introduction of high-frequency launch patterns combined with diverse weapon types, including UAVs, cruise missiles, and maneuverable ballistic systems, is now testing those assumptions. At the same time, regional tensions are further complicated by the involvement of external actors, including the United States, which maintains military assets and strategic commitments in the area. Any sustained pressure on Israeli defense systems inevitably carries implications for broader security arrangements, potentially drawing additional actors into the evolving situation. Meanwhile, the economic dimension cannot be ignored, as prolonged conflict places increasing strain on defense budgets, supply chains, and long-term resource sustainability. Each interception, while tactically necessary, contributes to a cumulative cost structure that may influence strategic decision-making over time. In parallel, Iran's ability to maintain a steady operational tempo suggests a level of preparation that extends beyond immediate tactical objectives. Estimates indicating that a significant portion of launch platforms remains active point to a strategy designed for endurance rather than rapid resolution. This raises critical questions about the balance between offensive persistence and defensive resilience in modern warfare. Is the current escalation a temporary surge, or does it represent a new model of conflict where saturation and attrition become the dominant strategies? Can advanced defense systems adapt quickly enough to counter threats that combine speed, volume, and unpredictability? And perhaps most importantly, what are the broader implications for regional stability if this pattern continues to intensify? According to defense tracking data and regional monitoring sources, the current escalation began to intensify in the final weeks of March when Iran significantly increased the frequency and coordination of its strike operations. Within this period, multiple waves of attacks were recorded each day, with estimates indicating between 80 to 100 missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles launched in coordinated sequences targeting Israeli territory. These were not random launches, but structured strike packages, where each layer of weaponry served a specific tactical purpose within a broader operational design. Initial waves often consisted of low-cost unmanned aerial vehicles, deployed in large numbers to trigger early detection systems and force defensive responses. Once interception systems such as Iron Dome were activated, subsequent waves of more advanced weapons, including cruise missiles and medium-range ballistic missiles, followed closely behind. This sequencing created a compressed timeline in which defensive systems were required to identify, track, and engage multiple targets simultaneously under increasing pressure. Israeli defense forces responded by deploying a multi-layered interception approach, combining Iron Dome for short-range threats, David's Sling for medium-range targets, and Arrow systems for ballistic missile interception. However, the continuous nature of the attacks reduced the available recovery time between engagement cycles, placing both personnel and systems under sustained operational strain. In several recorded instances, interception systems were required to process dozens of incoming targets within seconds, forcing prioritization decisions that could affect overall defensive effectiveness. Reports from regional observers indicate that more than 70 attack waves have been conducted since the escalation began, with no clear indication of a reduction in tempo. At the same time, Iranian forces introduced additional missile systems into the operational mix, including a medium-range ballistic missile reportedly capable of carrying a payload exceeding 1,000 kilograms. This system, believed to use solid fuel, allows for rapid deployment and reduced preparation time, limiting the window for pre-launch detection. Analysts note that its flight profile includes unpredictable trajectory adjustments during the terminal phase, complicating interception calculations. Shortly after, attention shifted toward the reported deployment of a hypersonic-capable missile, described by regional sources as reaching speeds up to Mach 12 under certain operational conditions. Unlike traditional ballistic missiles that follow more predictable arcs, this system is believed to incorporate maneuverability in its final approach, altering its path to evade interception. This capability challenges existing defense logic, as interception systems must rely on rapid recalculation rather than predefined trajectory prediction. In practical terms, this reduces engagement time to a critical minimum, increasing the probability of interception failure if even minor delays or miscalculations occur. During one of the most recent strike sequences, reports suggested that a missile of this class was directed toward the Dimona region, an area associated with strategic infrastructure. While official confirmations remain limited, the selection of such a target indicates a shift toward both operational and symbolic pressure. Simultaneously, Iran continued to integrate multiple layers of offensive capability, combining UAV swarms, conventional missile systems, and advanced strike platforms within a single coordinated framework. This approach forced Israeli defense systems to divide attention across multiple threat vectors, reducing overall efficiency and increasing vulnerability to breakthrough attempts. Meanwhile, Iranian officials and affiliated sources signaled that these operations were part of a broader strategy rather than isolated responses, emphasizing sustained engagement over rapid escalation. As the sequence of attacks continued, the pattern became increasingly clear. The objective was not to overwhelm defenses in a single moment, but to gradually stretch them beyond their optimal operating capacity. Each wave contributed incrementally to system fatigue, logistical consumption, and operational complexity, reinforcing the cumulative effect over time. This dynamic has transformed the confrontation into a prolonged engagement where endurance, rather than immediate impact, defines the evolving balance between offense and defense. To understand why the current escalation has become so difficult to contain, it is necessary to look beyond the immediate missile exchanges and examine the deeper strategic history that shapes the confrontation between Iran and Israel. This conflict did not emerge suddenly from a single incident. It is rooted in years of regional rivalry, competing security doctrines, and a long accumulation of unresolved tension stretching across military, political, and ideological lines. For years, Israel has viewed Iran's expanding missile capabilities, regional influence networks, and strategic partnerships as a long-term threat to its national security architecture. At the same time, Iran has regarded Israel not only as a military adversary but as a central pillar of a wider pressure system supported by the United States and aligned regional actors. This mutual perception has gradually transformed the relationship from indirect hostility into a sustained strategic confrontation. In earlier phases, the contest was often conducted through proxies, covert operations, cyber activity, targeted strikes, and intelligence competition, rather than prolonged direct military exchange. That pattern allowed both sides to apply pressure while avoiding the full risks of open confrontation. However, over time, the boundaries that once separated indirect competition from direct escalation began to erode. Each targeted killing, each strike on military infrastructure, each sabotage incident, and each retaliatory signal added a new layer of distrust and hardened the operational logic on both sides. Within this historical context, air defense became one of Israel's most important strategic priorities. Because the country faces threats from multiple directions and at different ranges, Israel invested heavily in building a layered defensive shield capable of intercepting rockets, ballistic missiles, and other airborne threats. Iron Dome became the most internationally recognized part of that architecture, widely associated with the ability to intercept short-range projectiles and protect population centers from rapid attack. Over time, additional systems such as David's Sling and Arrow were incorporated to extend the defensive envelope against more advanced and longer-range threats. This architecture was not built overnight. It was developed over years in response to repeated conflict, regional instability, and the need to maintain civilian and military resilience under fire. Its reputation grew through repeated operational use, and for a long period it symbolized the idea that advanced technology could offset geographic vulnerability. Yet every defense system, no matter how advanced, is shaped by assumptions about the type, volume, and tempo of threats it is expected to face. When those assumptions change, even the strongest system begins to face pressure. Iran appears to have studied that reality closely. Rather than focusing only on destructive power, the current strategy reflected in the reported attack patterns suggests attention to tempo, sequencing, and cumulative strain. This marks a broader historical shift in modern warfare, where success is not always determined by one decisive strike, but by the ability to exhaust an opponent's defensive rhythm over time. The use of low-cost UAVs as decoys, followed by more complex missile systems, reflects a doctrine that treats defense not as an impenetrable wall but as a structure that can be worn down through repetition and overload. This approach has appeared in multiple conflicts around the world, but in the Middle East it carries special weight because of the strategic density of the region. Military infrastructure, population centers, energy facilities, and symbolic targets are often located within a compressed geographic space, meaning that each breach carries amplified consequences. At the same time, the regional environment has become more unstable over the past decade. The wars in Syria, shifting alliances in the Gulf, fluctuations in U.S. regional posture, and the rise of drone and missile warfare have all changed the strategic map. Iran has benefited from this transformation by expanding its experience in asymmetric warfare, missile development, and regional coordination. Instead of relying solely on conventional force comparison, it has increasingly pursued methods designed to exploit cost imbalances and operational fatigue. That matters because modern defense is not only about technology, it is also about stockpiles, logistics, maintenance cycles, operator endurance, and the ability to sustain readiness under repeated strain. A system may perform effectively in a limited engagement but face growing difficulty when confronted with prolonged multi-wave attacks over days or weeks. This is where the historical background becomes essential. Israel's defensive doctrine was shaped by the need to survive sudden attack and restore stability quickly. Iran's emerging doctrine, by contrast, appears increasingly focused on extending confrontation, multiplying pressure points, and forcing costly defensive reactions again and again. That difference in strategic logic helps explain why the current escalation feels more dangerous than previous rounds. It is not simply about the destructive power of any one missile. It is about the clash between two different military philosophies, one built on rapid interception and layered protection, and another increasingly built on saturation, endurance, and cumulative pressure. The reported introduction of hypersonic-capable systems adds another layer to this already complex history. Such weapons are significant not only because of their speed, but because they represent a challenge to the predictive models that underlie many traditional air defense concepts. If a target can change direction late in flight and compress reaction time to seconds, then the defender is forced into a new environment where previous margins of safety become much thinner. This does not mean existing systems immediately become irrelevant, but it does mean their operating assumptions are being tested in ways that were once considered exceptional. At the same time, the symbolic dimension of this confrontation cannot be ignored. For Israel, maintaining the credibility of its defense shield is tied not only to military necessity but also to public confidence, deterrence, and national psychological stability. For Iran, demonstrating that even the most advanced defense network can be pressured carries regional and geopolitical value far beyond the battlefield itself. This is why the current phase cannot be understood as a simple exchange of fire. It is the product of years of rivalry, technological adaptation, proxy conflict, regional realignment, and changing doctrines of war. And as those long-term trends now collide in direct and visible ways, the risks are no longer confined to one strike or one response. They are embedded in a strategic history that has been building pressure for years and is now being tested in real time. What makes the current phase especially dangerous is not only the destructive power of the weapons being used, but the technical logic behind how the attacks are being structured and how defense systems are being forced to respond. The confrontation is increasingly becoming a test of system management, reaction timing, interceptor allocation, operational endurance, and command discipline under sustained pressure. At the center of this challenge is the principle of saturation. No air defense network is designed to intercept every incoming object under unlimited conditions for an unlimited period of time. Even the most advanced systems depend on a sequence of detection, classification, prioritization, launch decision, interceptor assignment, and target engagement. That sequence works most effectively when incoming threats remain within manageable numbers and predictable timing. When dozens of targets arrive nearly simultaneously, especially from different vectors and at different speeds, the burden on the defense architecture rises dramatically. This is where Iran's current attack method appears especially relevant. By combining low-cost UAVs, conventional missiles, and reportedly more advanced maneuverable systems within the same operational cycle, the attacking side forces the defender to solve multiple problems at once. A low-cost drone may not carry the same destructive weight as a ballistic missile, but if it appears at the right time and in the right volume, it can still impose real cost by triggering radar tracking, command attention, and interceptor expenditure. This creates what military analysts often describe as an asymmetric cost problem. The attacker can spend relatively little to force the defender to spend far more in response. Over time, this imbalance becomes strategically significant. It is not only about whether a target is intercepted. It is also about how much is consumed in each successful interception, how quickly stocks can be replenished, and whether the tempo of defense can be sustained day after day. In practical terms, a layered defense system such as Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow, and supporting American systems is powerful because it distributes responsibility across different threat categories. Iron Dome is optimized for short-range threats. Arrow is designed for ballistic missile defense. Other systems are meant to operate in the space between. But this layered structure also means the entire network depends on accurate sorting and rapid decision-making. If the system must simultaneously determine which targets are decoys, which are high-value threats, which can be ignored, and which require immediate interception, then time becomes the most critical variable. Under normal conditions, this process is already complex. Under continuous attack, it becomes a high-speed management problem with almost no margin for error. Each radar track must be assessed. Each incoming object must be classified. Each interceptor must be matched to a target at the correct moment. A small delay at any stage can create a cascading effect. One late decision can disrupt the timing of multiple engagements. One wrong priority call can allow a more dangerous threat to pass through while resources are spent elsewhere. This is why the reported appearance of a hypersonic-capable system changes the technical equation so sharply. Traditional missile interception depends heavily on trajectory prediction. If a target follows a relatively stable flight path, the defending system can estimate where it will be and launch an interceptor accordingly. But if the incoming system combines very high speed with late-stage maneuverability, the defense network is forced to recalculate under much tighter time constraints. That does not make interception impossible in every case, but it does make the process more demanding, more expensive, and more vulnerable to error. The difficulty is even greater when such a target appears during a broader wave that also includes UAVs and other missiles. In that situation, the defense network is not solving one problem, but several at once. It is trying to protect infrastructure, preserve interceptor stocks, avoid false prioritization, and maintain command continuity under real-time stress. Meanwhile, the human factor becomes increasingly important. Air defense is not operated by machines alone. It depends on crews, command teams, maintenance personnel, logistics officers, and intelligence support working in coordination for long hours under pressure. When attacks continue without meaningful pause, fatigue becomes a technical issue as much as a human one. Operators become more vulnerable to overload. Maintenance cycles become harder to complete. Decision quality can decline. The probability of a small mistake increases, and in missile defense, a small mistake can have strategic consequences. Another important layer is logistics. A defense system is only as resilient as its ability to reload, repair, reposition, and replace what it uses. Each interceptor fired is no longer available for the next engagement until stocks are replenished. Each launcher that remains active for extended periods must be maintained. Each radar operating continuously under strain faces its own wear and coordination burden. When an attacker understands this, the goal no longer has to be immediate destruction. The goal can become operational exhaustion. This appears to be a central feature of the current pattern. Iran's reported approach suggests a strategy designed not simply to break the shield in one dramatic moment, but to keep that shield under stress until weaknesses begin to emerge naturally. That is why the use of low-cost drones matters so much. Even when they are intercepted, they may still achieve a strategic purpose by forcing repeated defensive activation. They consume attention, tracking capacity, and sometimes high-value munitions. If they are used in front of more dangerous missile waves, they become part of a layered attrition formula. The defender is compelled to react, but every reaction carries cost. At the same time, the reported targeting of strategically sensitive areas adds further pressure to the response structure. If infrastructure, military sites, or symbolically important zones are perceived to be at risk, the defender may be forced to intercept more aggressively, even when doing so accelerates stock depletion. This creates a difficult balance between immediate protection and long-term sustainability. Too cautious a response can open the way to breakthrough. Too aggressive a response can drain resources faster than they can be restored. This is the management dilemma at the heart of modern missile defense under saturation conditions. It is not only a technological contest. It is a contest of timing, endurance, stock management, prioritization logic, and institutional resilience. In that sense, the current confrontation is exposing a fundamental truth about high-tech warfare. A defense system may be extremely capable, but if it is forced to operate continuously against layered, adaptive, and cost-efficient pressure, then its greatest vulnerability may not be a single strike. Its greatest vulnerability may be the gradual accumulation of strain across every part of the system. As the military pressure intensifies, the international dimension of the crisis is becoming impossible to separate from the battlefield itself. What is unfolding is no longer viewed solely as an exchange between Iran and Israel, but as a confrontation with wider diplomatic, strategic, and regional consequences. The first layer of this reaction comes from the United States, whose security commitments and military posture in the region give Washington a direct stake in the stability of the confrontation. As Israeli air defense systems face sustained pressure, the burden does not fall on Israel alone. Any prolonged strain on interception capacity, military logistics, or regional deterrence immediately raises questions about the role of U.S. support, intelligence, coordination, and strategic backup. This is what makes the situation particularly sensitive. The more heavily the defensive structure is tested, the more Washington is drawn into the equation, whether through visible support, expanded military readiness, or behind-the-scenes coordination. Yet this growing involvement also creates a difficult dilemma for the United States. If Washington expands its role too openly, it risks becoming more directly exposed to escalation. If it appears too cautious, it may fuel questions about the credibility of its regional commitments. This tension is now one of the most important diplomatic pressures surrounding the crisis. At the same time, the military signals being sent by Iran appear designed not only for tactical effect, but also for international messaging. The reported use of increasingly advanced missile systems sends a message that the confrontation is no longer confined to older patterns of deterrence. It suggests that Tehran wants regional actors, global powers, and strategic observers to recognize that the balance of pressure is changing. This matters because diplomatic influence is often shaped not only by formal statements, but by perceptions of momentum, resilience, and capability on the ground. If Iran can sustain operations while forcing high-cost defensive responses from Israel and its partners, then that battlefield dynamic itself becomes a geopolitical signal. Meanwhile, other actors in the region are closely watching the pace of escalation. Any sustained weakening in the sense of defensive certainty could encourage broader recalculations among states that have so far tried to avoid direct exposure. For some governments, the concern is military. For others, it is economic, especially if the confrontation expands toward energy routes, shipping lanes, or critical regional infrastructure. This is why the diplomatic response to the crisis cannot be reduced to simple statements of support or condemnation. Behind every public message lies a deeper concern about whether the conflict is moving toward a contained confrontation or a wider regional chain reaction. Another important layer of the diplomatic picture is the symbolic value of strategic targets. If areas associated with highly sensitive infrastructure are placed under pressure, the international response becomes more urgent even in the absence of full official confirmation. Such developments raise the stakes because they suggest that deterrence is being tested not only at the tactical level, but also at the psychological and political level. For Israel, maintaining the image of a credible and functioning defense shield is essential not only for security, but also for diplomatic posture. A country that appears able to protect its strategic depth projects strength outward. A country seen as increasingly forced into reactive defense under constant pressure may begin to face more complex diplomatic scrutiny. At the same time, Iran appears to be using this reality to expand the meaning of its actions beyond immediate military gain. By maintaining offensive tempo and introducing more complex systems, Tehran is not merely trying to strike targets. It is also shaping the international conversation around vulnerability, endurance, and strategic adaptation. This is where diplomacy and warfare start to merge. Every interception, every reported breakthrough attempt, every indication of growing pressure feeds into a wider international interpretation of who is absorbing the cost and who is controlling the rhythm of the conflict. The regional implications are equally serious. If the crisis continues at high intensity, neighboring states and external partners may be forced to revise their own military readiness, political messaging, and contingency planning. Some may increase defensive coordination. Others may seek distance from the confrontation to avoid entanglement. Still others may use the moment to reposition themselves strategically. This creates a diplomatic environment in which the conflict radiates outward far beyond the immediate exchange of fire. The battlefield becomes only one arena. The other arena is the international system itself, where perceptions, alliances, deterrence credibility, and strategic signaling are being tested in real time. At the center of all this is one core reality. The longer the confrontation lasts, the harder it becomes to keep military pressure separate from diplomatic consequences. What begins as a defense crisis can evolve into a broader regional test of alliance structure, security guarantees, and political endurance. That is why the current phase is being watched so closely far beyond the Middle East. It is not simply about missiles, drones, or interception rates. It is about whether a prolonged campaign of pressure can reshape the diplomatic balance just as effectively as it challenges the military one. As the confrontation continues to evolve, analysts are increasingly focused not only on what has already happened, but on what could happen next if the current trajectory is maintained. The situation is no longer defined by a single chain of events, but by a set of possible scenarios, each carrying different levels of risk for the region and beyond. The first scenario is a continued high-intensity attrition phase. In this case, Iran maintains its current operational rhythm, sustaining daily launches of missiles and UAVs in layered formations designed to keep pressure constant. Israeli defense systems continue to intercept a large portion of incoming threats, but at the cost of increasing resource consumption, operational fatigue, and logistical strain. Under this scenario, there is no immediate collapse on either side. Instead, the conflict becomes a prolonged endurance contest, where the outcome depends on which side can sustain its capacity longer. The risk here is cumulative. Even without a single decisive breakthrough, the continuous pressure may gradually weaken defensive efficiency, increase the probability of errors, and raise the chance of critical targets being exposed over time. The second scenario involves a breakthrough moment under saturation conditions. In this case, the combination of high volume, mixed weapon types, and compressed reaction time could lead to a situation where multiple targets pass through the defense network simultaneously. Such an event would not necessarily mean the total failure of the defense system, but it could create a powerful psychological and strategic shock. If a high-value or symbolically significant target were to be struck, the consequences could extend far beyond immediate physical damage. Public confidence, deterrence, credibility, and political stability could all be affected at once. This scenario carries a high escalation risk, as it may trigger stronger retaliatory measures or force rapid strategic decisions under pressure. The third scenario is regional expansion. As the conflict intensifies, the possibility increases that additional actors may become more directly involved, either through military alignment, logistical support, or strategic positioning. The presence of U.S. forces in the region, combined with Iran's signaling capacity and regional networks, creates a situation where localized escalation could expand into a broader confrontation. This does not require a deliberate decision for full-scale war. It can emerge from a chain reaction of responses, where each side reacts to perceived threats in ways that unintentionally widen the scope of the conflict. In such a scenario, the risk is no longer limited to missile exchanges. Energy routes, maritime security, economic stability, and global supply chains could all become part of the strategic equation. The fourth scenario involves diplomatic recalibration under pressure. If the cost of sustained confrontation continues to rise for all parties, there may be renewed efforts to reintroduce negotiation channels, whether publicly or through indirect communication. However, this path is complex. Any move toward de-escalation must be balanced against domestic expectations, strategic positioning, and perceived strength. Neither side may want to appear as stepping back under pressure, even if both recognize the long-term risks of continued escalation. This creates a paradox. The longer the conflict continues, the stronger the incentives for negotiation may become. At the same time, the higher the political cost of initiating that negotiation may be. Across all these scenarios, one factor remains constant: uncertainty. The speed of technological adaptation, the variability of operational decisions, and the complexity of international reactions make precise prediction extremely difficult. Small incidents can have outsized effects. A single interception failure, a misinterpreted signal, or an unexpected strike could rapidly shift the direction of the entire confrontation. This is particularly true in an environment where decision timelines are compressed and the margin for error is extremely small. At the same time, the psychological dimension of the conflict is becoming increasingly important. Perceptions of strength, vulnerability, resilience, and control are now shaping not only military decisions but also political narratives and international positioning. If one side is seen as gaining momentum, even temporarily, it may influence how other actors respond, align, or distance themselves. In this sense, the conflict is not only being fought through weapon systems, but also through interpretation, perception, and strategic messaging. That is what makes the current phase so sensitive. It is not just about what happens on the battlefield, but about how each development is understood, amplified, and responded to across multiple layers of the international system. The central question moving forward is not simply whether the confrontation will continue. It is how far it can go before one of these scenarios begins to dominate the trajectory. As the situation continues to unfold, the confrontation between Iran and Israel is no longer defined by isolated strikes or short-term escalation cycles. What is emerging is a prolonged and complex strategic contest shaped by sustained pressure, technological adaptation, and the evolving balance between offensive persistence and defensive endurance. From the repeated waves of UAVs and missile launches to the reported introduction of hypersonic-capable systems, each development reflects a broader shift in how modern conflicts are conducted. This is no longer a battlefield dominated solely by firepower. It is a system-level contest where timing, cost, coordination, and resilience play equally critical roles. Israel's multi-layered defense architecture remains one of the most advanced in the world, designed to intercept a wide range of threats across different altitudes and distances. However, as the current escalation has shown, even the most sophisticated systems can be placed under significant strain when confronted with sustained, multi-vector, and adaptive attack patterns. At the same time, Iran's operational approach appears to emphasize continuity rather than immediacy, leveraging repetition, cost imbalance, and layered sequencing to reshape the rhythm of confrontation. This contrast between rapid interception and long-term pressure is now at the core of the unfolding dynamic. Beyond the technical dimension, the implications extend into the political, economic, and diplomatic spheres. Every interception, every reported strike, and every shift in momentum contributes to a broader narrative that influences regional stability and global perception. The longer the confrontation persists, the more these layers begin to interact, making the situation increasingly difficult to contain within a single domain. This raises fundamental questions about the future of conflict in the region and beyond. Can defensive systems continue to adapt fast enough to counter increasingly complex and layered threats? Will prolonged pressure reshape the balance of deterrence in ways that extend beyond the immediate actors involved? And perhaps most critically, at what point does sustained escalation cross the threshold into a wider and less controllable regional crisis? At this stage, no single answer fully captures the trajectory ahead. The situation remains fluid, shaped by decisions, reactions, and developments that continue to evolve in real time. What is clear, however, is that the confrontation has entered a phase where endurance, adaptability, and strategic calculation may matter more than any single moment of impact. We will continue to monitor the developments closely and bring you in-depth analysis as new information emerges. If you found this breakdown useful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on the latest global developments. Your perspective matters, so let us know in the comments how you see this situation evolving in the coming days.